In 2009, a company called Ericsson came under U.S. pressure for selling telecom equipment to several oppressive governments. Ericsson sponsored a speech by Bill Clinton, paying him $750,000, his highest paying speech. In April 2012, the Obama administration issued an executive order imposing sanctions on telecom sales to Iran and Syria, but those sanctions did not cover Ericsson's work in Iran.
Good evening. I'm Lara Logan. I'm a journalist, and I have been a journalist for all my life, and more than 35 years at this point. And it's funny because the attack on me is relentlessly the same. She once was a great reporter, and now she sucks, and now she's crazy, and now she's too crazy and too far right for right-wing media, and so on and so on. Just pick your narrative. I really don't care, because people who are wrong about everything or deliberately lie, they just don't get to pass judgment on me. And I'll tell you, I don't even read it anymore. It doesn't even cause my blood pressure to rise. I literally don't care. I recommend it for everybody out there. It's a great feeling not to be afraid of what they can do or say about you. And Michael, I know that you guys, the realm that you're operating in, you are at great risk. I mean, us having this conversation tonight is pretty much taking on some of the most powerful, or the most powerful people in the world. People who own all of the physical infrastructure, own or control all of the physical infrastructure that moves our data, stores our data, controls our data. And by data, I mean everything from phone calls to emails to texts to photographs to business records to, fundraising campaigns to 911 calls to the national missing database of missing children. I mean, pretty much you name it, they control it. And primarily why I wanted to do this space tonight, everybody, is, a lot of us, most people out there have this illusion that their secrets, when they hit the button, they just go off into the ether, into this imaginary cloud. And, none of us can reach the clouds, right? So it must be out of reach, except it's not out of reach. It's very much in reach. It's owned and controlled by people who making a lot of money out of exploiting all of us. And I believe that that's the real divide in our society. And it will become more and more clear with time. So when I stumbled across Michael and the Ericsson report, actually, I don't know if I stumbled across it so much as Michael just tortured me forever until I eventually responded. Is that right, Michael?
Absolutely.
So for everybody, everybody's tuning in here. Some of you will know Michael Khoury. Some of you will be familiar with the Ericsson report. Some of you won't have any idea about it. So let me start by explaining the thing that I think is very significant to understanding what we're talking about. For the longest time, as I began to learn about the Ericsson report, I kept asking myself, who is Michael Khoury? And I would ask him that question. How many times did I ask you that question, Michael?
Too many.
There you go. Because I wasn't satisfied with his answer. And so this is central. I think this is the very first thing that we have to establish right now, is that Michael Khoury is this kind of odd guy who was in mortgages, for goodness sake. And somehow, through being in mortgages, he is, he becomes the central figure in exposing really the most powerful people and the corruption and the dishonesty behind what they own and control in our society, the political figures in the establishment that support them, and what all of this means for us. So, the obvious question that I had in the very beginning was, well, what does he know about this? And can I really trust that? And doesn't it seem odd that some guy in mortgages ends up in this kind of realm? Like, what does he know about technology, and why him? And I'm going to, Michael, I'll let you answer some of those questions, but just to frame this properly for people, Michael has had a painful personal journey to get here, and we'll talk more about that. But essentially, what I didn't understand that was critical to understanding Michael Khoury and the Ericsson report is very simply this. When you apply for a mortgage, you pretty much give up the keys to your personal kingdom. They know everything about you. They have access to your banking records. They have, I mean, it's just extraordinary what they have the ability to know and understand about you. And that, Michael, am I right in saying that window into people's private lives and into their companies and into all that information that they submit when they're applying for mortgages, that was your window into uncovering a world that you did not imagine. Is that right?
100%, yeah. And it was just wild when I saw just how unregulated the industry was, and just how I could literally pull up anybody's tax returns, from Warren Buffett to, I mean, literally you name it, I could just pull their tax returns up, from getting given a token, a security token that was supposed to be vice president of the bank, and they accidentally gave me vice president of the entire company.
Okay, wait. So take us back a few steps. Where were you working and what was your job?
I was working at Quicken Loans, and I was a director of mortgage banking, also working specifically within the technology number porting aspects. So I'd caught on to something that was happening within the company where they were wasting about, I'd say, $25 to $30 million year over year. And it was just because they would port these leads that were very expensive, industry only leads, meaning they're like $1,500 a pop. And they were all filled out, all the data is ready to go. Basically, everything is automatically filled up. Nothing.
But wait, what do you mean by a lead, an industry lead?
Lead, a mortgage lead. So like when the
what is that?
So when you take a call to do a refinance or a purchase, it's a lead that comes through the system, and so these leads are pre-populated with all the information, all the data, automatically connected to a banker that is basically the power of attorney for a bunch of wealthy elites. So usually, I started noticing patterns. I started noticing specific bankers were, running the profiles, and these profiles are massive, billions and trillions of dollars, for specific subsets of different elites. And so I kept noticing that pattern, and I was like, okay, this is strange. Why don't any of them have their own power of attorney? And then I learned, once I fell down the rabbit hole of the Federal Reserve, kind of realized that the whole entire industry is fraudulent.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is they utilize escrows and taxes to basically never make a mortgage payment. They use that to basically take the highest interest rate on a refinance or a mortgage or purchase. They cycle those refinances basically over 3 to 5 times a year. And what that does is, let's say your property is like $400,000 for the mortgage, but the property itself is like $7 million. Well, taxes in like California, Texas, different areas, Boston, Massachusetts, are extremely expensive. So you still have to fill up that escrow account. Now that escrow account is your loophole. So when you go to refinance, that loophole gets shut, and then you get everything that's in that escrow account, and it moves it over to the next company you move over to. But if you just keep that cycle going, because what you do is you take the highest rate available, and what that does is it fills your escrow account up, and it allows you to pay all your expenses, your per diem, your all the expenses. So then what ends up happening is basically the tax rate goes up in all those cities, all those counties for the poor, and then the elites basically pretend like they're not doing this, but it's a legal loophole, and that really frustrated me for like the longest time. So eventually, I wouldn't shut up for quite a bit of time. I kept on saying, I'm not going to stop talking about this. This is wrong.
And you were talking about this inside the company, right?
Yeah, I was the first one to go to the meeting where all of the executives were at the meeting. I was the only banker level, employee at the meeting, and there was 250 executives. And I stood up and kind of told them, like, hey, this is definitely not cool that this is happening, right? Like, basically told me, shut up, like, look the other way. You got an opportunity to basically make billions of dollars. But yeah, I wouldn't shut up, and then I got fired 3 years later.
Okay, but Michael, in that time, right? So what happens? Like, while you're working on this, you you get access. I don't know how comfortable you are speaking about how you got that access. Doesn't really matter.
Just a dummy in IT. Like he misassigned the token. He was a guy filling in on a Saturday.
And by the token, what you mean is basically your access code to the system, which is your keys to the kingdom, because you have the highest level of access at Quicken Loans, which means that you can see what?
Everything.
What is everything?
Old legacy loans, old different bundles of mortgage-backed securities that are supposed to be, on legacy software that's not supposed to be active. But when I started noticing that those old softwares were still drawing interest, compound interest, I was like, what the hell is going on here? So they basically just duplicate all the bonds and all the mortgages on the back end, and just funnel it all over to different corporations. Those corporations will move their funds over to like the Cayman Islands, and then that corporation will bankrupt itself after all the board members get off of the board. It's patent fraud, but I could never. I didn't have enough information. I couldn't pull enough intel from like the Cayman Islands and those other foreign islands to be able to trace it back.
And your background is IT, correct?
Yep.
Can you explain that?
I'm just a guy that when you tell me not to look down a corner, I'm going to look down the corner when you're not there.
But what's your qualification, Mr.
I went to University of Michigan for business psychology. Not too many qualifications, because it was my cousin was like, hey, just come here, come work here. I'm making like $350,000. This is right after the real estate crash bubble, so you're talking like no regulations, no rules still. Anybody with a pulse in 2008 could get a mortgage. You get like 4 or 5 of them. Eventually, you go on down the line. I end up doxing the Vegas shooter while working for a different mortgage company. I was listening on 911 emergency calls, and so this is what I had assumed, right?
Okay, so Michael, wait. Before we go into what you assume, because you have so much information in your head, and I want people to understand and be able to follow it. So I need you to explain that, because you're going from mortgages. Remember, you're an IT guy working in a mortgage company, and now you're doxing the Vegas shooter. What the hell?
Yes, I was on 4chan, and I was on different like anonymous messaging boards. And so when I saw that this shooting happened, I got like really, really frustratedly angry. So I was on the 4chan boards, and I noticed, okay, this is really strange. Shooter starts firing. So I turn on the 911 emergency services for Vegas at the time. I'm listening to the scanner live.
How? How are you listening to that scanner?
It's publicly available.
Wow.
At the time.
How did you find it? On the internet?
Yeah. So
I got a feeling your internet skills surpass mine.
Oh, yeah.
Now that we have that established, people. Okay. So you're listening to the 911 calls, and then what?
And then I went like an idiot, went onto Twitter, and they bleeped. So like I could tell that now, like thinking back on it and reprocessing it, I'm like, okay, this was definitely a recorded call that was being replayed. And it was only after like sitting down and connecting with Mindy Robinson and watching her work on what really took place that day. But you got to understand, like from my perspective, I'm listening live, assuming everything is happening live in real time, not knowing that, according to what people are saying, that may or may not have been Stephen Paddock, may or not have been the Patsy, whatever.
Okay, but I don't. Yeah. So first of all, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know who Mandy Robinson is, and I want you just to explain to me what was it that you were hearing.
So I was hearing the shooter down, and then I heard them say, "Here's the identified. Here's their address, right?" So they bleeped out his name, and then they bleeped out the first couple of digits of the address. But I had just gotten my Nevada license, so perfectly timed for me to do a reverse escrow search. And when I did a reverse escrow search, up popped Stephen Paddock. And so I, like an idiot, published that online on Twitter with my...
It's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing that through mortgages, you have access to so much information.
Yeah, technically that was public access at the time. I don't know what they've done since then, but public records are usually, tax records, escrow records are usually public.
Okay, and now, why were you upset when you heard about the shooting? I mean, I just want to know what specifically was it that you were upset about?
Just sick and tired of what I saw at the time was just what I thought was terrorist attacks and just people being killed aimlessly. Because I grew up in Lebanon, which is right in the middle of Syria, Israel, southern Lebanon. So I've grown up, being told 9/11 was these terrorists, Saudi Arabian terrorists, and knowing that I go there every summer and I hang out with my best friends, one of which was a Israeli Jew, one of which was a Muslim. So we're all reading each other's texts and exchanging them amongst each other and realizing there's no way we're not any different from each other. So I'm Christian. He's Jewish. He's
One's Jewish, one's Muslim.
And,
yeah,
it's all the same texts. Basically telling this is a very similar story, right? Just treat each other how you'd like to be treated. Don't.
With respect. Yeah. I understand. Okay, so here's the interesting part, people, and I know it can be a little complicated, so we're going to do our best to break down the Ericsson report in simple terms, because once you understand it, and once you realize exactly how many people in public office are involved in this, in covering up for Ericsson, and the kind of power that these private companies like this have, it's pretty shocking, and obviously a little bit scary. For the record, I just want to say to everybody, I'm not suicidal. Michael, I know you're not suicidal, and so can you explain to us how did that go? From peering into people's accounts, noticing corrupt practices in the mortgage industry that favored, basically the wealthiest elites, and that hurt the average person out there. How did you go from that to how did you get to the Ericsson report?
I was randomly gotten cancer. I should say, randomly got this really rare disease called pleva. That caused me to basically stay up, not sleeping ever, for about 18 months. And then I was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma, which I had to basically undergo 12 rounds of chemo to beat, which successfully I did, but I had a port put in my chest. So while I was in the hospital, I was watching General Flynn and Donald Trump basically fight back against the FBI and against the deep state. And just, I was an anonymous message board sleuth. So I was in my hospital bed, undergoing cancer, posting on this anonymous message board while also on my Twitter account.
I gotta say, it's a pretty staggering story. There's it kind of takes your breath away in a lot of ways, but that unfortunate, terrible thing that happened to you, how that basically put you in a situation where you had the time on your hands to do what you do best, which is kind of nose into everybody's business, go into places that most other people can't reach, and then put it all together, because you're obviously brilliant when it comes to this stuff. So now, it'd be kind of frustrating for people who are not familiar with the Ericsson report at this point to hear me banging on about it without explaining what it is. But you got to explain what it is, because you're the one that really understands.
Yeah, so really, from its most basic, right, you think of how a signal travels through a line. And so it's energy, frequency, vibration. That's how you get noise or signal or energy through fiber cables or through internet cables. So when you go to dial out to 911, you have to have your cell phone, but you have that phone connection has to be ported over. And so that's ported over when you go to dial out to 911, emergency services, your fire, your police, your EMS, so on.
Ported over from where? From your cell phone to?
Yeah, so the number portability center is your basically your iConnective. That company strictly deals with porting of the phone numbers for 6.5, I think it's 6.5 billion cell phones around the world, 230 top-level domains. So this all, conveniently, right? These people the elites who run the world, they're going to want everything to go and basically be commingled back to one place. And that's your iConnective Ericsson, which was formerly Newstar.
Okay, so just to be clear here, I think everybody can understand the concept that consolidation, right? Anytime you consolidate and bring like every device in your home onto one system, all people have to do is have control of that one system, and they control every device in your house. And that's essentially what you're saying,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. Except for the only caveat is that they went from domestic, right, a domestic non-agency outside of government contract to a foreign corporation in Ericsson. And
okay, so before we get there, Michael, and forgive me because, I'm really dumb when it comes to this stuff. But I'm one of those people that just picks up my phone, dials a number, and doesn't think about where that goes or how it gets there, right? And so when you say portability, who are the portability companies? There are actual companies. So you're saying if I've got AT&T, Verizon, Cricket, it doesn't matter what it is. When I'm on these cell towers, right? I'm on my cell service. I dial a number. It goes to a portability center. Is that where it goes?
Exactly. To your Newstar, which it was Newstar for the first 17 years. And then in 2012, 2013, they awarded the contract over to Ericsson.
Okay, so who awarded that contract? From Newstar, an American company, to Ericsson, a foreign Swedish company, correct?
Yeah, basically. So the FCC awards it under Obama. End of 2012, beginning of 2013.
Okay, so and Ericsson has that contract for, how many countries in the world?
Well, Newstar has it. It's Newstar who owned it, and Newstar controlled it. You think of the capital N and the capital S in Newstar, and you realize that's actually the front company for the NSA. So everybody, So everybody hears NSA, and they just automatically assume, the NSA. It's like, how does the NSA get their data? That's Newstar. So,
how do you know that Newstar is a front company for this NSA? What's that based on?
Because a British military intelligence operative in like 2005 or 6 wrote about it on a public forum where he published an article about it.
And was he obviously attacked and savaged for doing so?
I don't think he actually realized what he was publishing. But at the time, right, you had such crooks in office that it really didn't matter.
And now, one important thing to say here for anybody who's following this, Michael provides all of these documents. There's nothing that you withhold unless it's like sort of super sensitive, right? And you're figuring out how to get it out.
For this,
right?
For this report, I had to do everything open source. So everything is open source intelligence.
You're pretty transparent from my experience. In fact, you want people to follow up and look at these documents.
Yeah, not enough people actually will read the report. That's definitely a fact.
Okay, so the Ericsson report is an actual physical report. Let's go back to explaining what it is. You have your cell phone, you make a call, and it goes to one of these portability companies, such as what, Michael? What are their names?
So they all subcontract. It all subcontracts for basically your AT&T or Verizon, your T-Mobile, all of those companies. They subcontract through a company called iConnective is what it became when they transferred the contract over, which was a brand new subsidiary of Ericsson, basically brand new, created.
Oh, and what was it before it went to Ericsson?
It was AT&T's data center in New Jersey. So basically, you think about it.
Okay. Yeah. So then what?
So then a foreign corporation comes in and buys our critical infrastructure, basically everything AT&T had owned and controlled before. And so I believe that was a criminal measure conducted by the Obama administration to cover up for what took place under his administration and prior to his administration regarding John Durham's CIA torture tape investigation, which the other company, Khoury Technologies, which becomes Ericsson iConnective, they were the ones who controlled the CIA torture tapes in Abbottabad, where basically Osama bin Laden was hiding out.
So, Michael, when you say that this is connected to the agency, explain what you mean by that.
How is it connected to the CIA?
Well, what you just said now, that they were covering for John Durham's investigation.
So that part is technically right. I don't have publicly accessible information to go into that, but I do have the Telcordia transfer, which was something that Loretta Lynch actually customly took over in 2001. So,
okay, explain that. So 2001, Loretta Lynch does what exactly? And at the time, what's her position?
So her position, she's working as a commissioner. She transfers it over to she signs off on the transfer 22 days, I think, or 21 days before.
Transfer of what?
Transfer of basically the same exact idea. You're just transferring it over over to Neustar, rather. Sorry, on September the 11th, the morning of.
Well, when you say it, Michael, what do you mean
porting of numbers.
Okay, so what you're saying is you have all these cell phone companies that are basically sending all of their calls through AT&T servers. That's the Portability
Correct.
Center. And in 2002, Loretta Lynch is the person who signs off on the sale of that from AT&T's data centers over to Telcordia, correct?
So basically hands it over to Telcordia Technologies, transfers it from Telcordia to Neustar. And that's and she signs off on it on 22 days before September the 11th.
Okay, and what's the significance of that?
The significance of that is that you have basically the most important aspects of number porting being transferred over, to really it's not the craziest thing that happened on September the 11th, but it happened via emergency contract. So it required the buildings to go down.
Okay, wait, no, before you go to 9/11, you can't go there yet. We haven't even finished explaining about that. Okay, but I'm asking you a very simple question. I don't get the significance of transferring it to Neustar. You said from Telcordia to Neustar in 2002, correct?
22 days before September 11th, 2001. August 20th.
2001. Yep. Okay, but why does that matter?
Because Ericsson ends up taking control via free hands on September the 11th, but it's through this emergency contract that any of that even takes place. So,
is this an issue because Neustar is a front company for the NSA?
Yeah, but realistically, both companies were owned by Warburg Pincus at the time, so it really didn't. You know what I mean? It was like potato.
Okay, so Warburg Pincus, you have to explain that. You can't just throw that in there.
Okay, hold on.
And when you say both companies, you mean Neustar and Ericsson, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have Neustar. I mean, basically, AT&T is controlling the portability centers,
correct.
Right? And that transfers. And when I say AT&T, you mean AT&T Telcordia.
Yep. And Telcordia, yeah. So you look at the timeline, and it's basically on January 12th of 2012 is where the fishy stuff starts to happen. But at one point in 2011, you have Warburg Pincus owning CrowdStrike, Telcordia, and Neustar. So all three companies.
Okay, but Warburg Pincus is a law firm, right?
Correct.
Okay, so you have a law firm that owns
investment firm.
All of these. Right, so these are their investments. So they own, take me through that again.
CrowdStrike, Telcordia, and Neustar.
So interesting, because for those people who know the inside baseball on this, CrowdStrike, of course, is the technology company that Hillary Clinton would ultimately use to troll through her, home server to, of course, determine that she didn't have any, she shouldn't have there, and then, of course, they were the people that suggested initially that there had been a hack, and eventually, under oath, the head of CrowdStrike admitted that nothing was ever hacked from the DNC servers, and that basically proved that the former NSA cryptologist Bill Binney was correct when he said that this information that came from the DNC had been downloaded onto a hard drive. And he knew that from the speed and from the other things in the data, such as the coding that the numbers ended in for each line of code and so on, things that are signatures, digital signatures. And Binney proved that, but of course he was attacked, and they tried to discredit him, but they couldn't crush it because Bill Binney is too widely respected. I mean, at one time at the NSA, he had 2 entire floors devoted entirely to him. I mean, he was and remains a legendary figure for anyone who knows and understands the cyber world, cybersecurity, and and so on. So, but that's just interesting that CrowdStrike and Neustar and Ericsson would all be owned by Warburg Pincus, which is a law firm, and we don't expect law firms to be in. I mean, if you said to me BlackRock or something like that, that would make more sense. But now you've got a law firm that owns all these technology companies.
Yep, and so before that, I'll just really really briefly touch on the fact that SAIC was, so when Benny's thin thread gets denied, it gets taken over by Trailblazer and SAIC. So they go with the corporate solution to that problem, which wasn't a problem because Benny provided everything that was needed to protect Americans. But of course, the CIA doesn't want that. The CIA wants.
Okay, let me unpack that for people. Bill Binney created a program called ThinThread, which had the ability to sift through data, intelligence gathered by the NSA globally, mountains and mountains and mountains of data, without violating the privacy of American citizens. And it was essentially rooted in metadata and patterns of analysis and patterns that linked people together. So what it did was that it sifted through the data to basically find a needle in a haystack, but it did so in a way that did not violate the Fourth Amendment. And Bill Binney put that forward at the NSA, but actually General Michael Hayden, when he was in charge, he was the one who said, no, we don't want that. Instead, we want to pay, instead of having the free solution that you can have in-house from one of our own trusted people who is widely respected, right, across the world. No, we're going to go with the private company solution that absolutely violates the privacy rights of every single American.
Exactly. Yeah, and it was the one that was like billions of dollars.
Yeah, and was going to cost the taxpayer billions of dollars. Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty crazy. But then you leapfrog, fast forward past it. Now this tech transfer, I want everyone to know, but the tech transfer actually occurs on September the 11th, 2001. The patent for local number portability put in place by Ericsson was put in place on September the 11th, 1998. So that's, I guess, a coincidence.
Yeah, I guess, if you believe in coincidences. Okay, Michael, so let's go back, right? Because we went forward to 2012, 2013, yep. And we're still at the point in 2001, a couple weeks before 9/11, when Loretta Lynch, who at the time is an official in New York, when she approves the sale of AT&T Telcordia's number portability centers to Neustar, yep. Which is a front company for the NSA.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and why does she do that?
I would assume probably corruption, because how did they know that an emergency contract would be put in place? Because you can't just like flip the switch on technology like that. But that's precisely what they did.
I don't understand what that means. I don't understand what emergency contract you're talking about.
On September the 11th, 2001, they were awarded a emergency contract because they said that.
Who was?
Neustar. Because they said that nobody else could, handle it. So they just.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. So 2 weeks before 9/11, Neustar basically takes over control of pretty much the entire mobile information system
not all of
in
it,
the United States.
But the addresses they need, basically Chicago, New York, and I think California. Those are the three that they really needed. And
what do they need them for?
Because that's where all the data gets pinged over from there was no backup database until literally September 10th, 2001, where Verizon became the backup on that day. Like 4 or 5 hours before the towers went down.
Goodness, you gotta wonder what on earth is going on here. 2 weeks before 9/11, Neustar takes over the contract, and hours before, Verizon establishes backup centers.
The day of.
Okay, so then what happens on September 11th? As a result of the attacks, an emergency contract is approved by the Bush administration, right? And what does it say?
It basically provides Neustar executive office privileges plus for several different area codes. Basically, on that day, you had Cheney, because Bush was in Florida. Cheney was the go-to, and so he went down into the emergency, basement. on that day, and everybody went down there. So everybody on the top, right, was able to go in and basically change out all the stuff. So they changed out all of the equipment, changed out all the records, changed out all the data. And so the same company that ends up spying on Donald Trump in 2016 through 2021 is the same company that's been spying on the executive office of the president since 2001, September 11th. That's Neustar.
Okay, but I don't understand the significance of that emergency contract. Why did they need to give those portability centers special access?
I mean, I could give you the corporate answer, which would be
yeah, give me both.
So the corporate answer is that they needed to have a backup or a company that could handle the load.
The load of what?
I mean, the infrastructure, the ability to transfer all of this data, basically porting the number.
What did that have to? What data? What did it have to do with 9/11?
Well, it had to do. I would assume probably with the data for not assume, but for porting, right? You're talking about all of the trades that are happening at the World Trade Center.
Well, so in the beginning, you started out by talking about cell phones, but actually, it's more than cell phone calls that go through the portability centers. It's all the data.
Internet
including financial transactions.
Correct. So through DNS, domain name server, you have Neustar controlling all the top level domains in 230 plus countries, plus the cell phone access in 230 plus countries. And then all of that gets transferred over to Ericsson in 2012.
In 2012. And so, I mean, how is it that they have the contracts for so many countries all over the world? I mean, how does Neustar make that happen?
That's a good question. They were the go-to, I guess. I mean, it's strange. You look at it from 2001 to 2004. Yeah, and how they accumulated all those contracts in that little time. Because by 2002, 2003, they had already had all of those top-level domains in all of those 230 plus countries. So
basically, you have the vast majority of data that is passing digitally, from one country to the next, one business to the next, one person to the next, is going through these portability centers that are controlled by Neustar. And Neustar is not that big a company, is it?
Well, for what they did and what they've been doing for CIA and MI6, pretty big deal. But when it's a front organization, right, you're not going to think much of it. You're just going to think, oh, they just provide DNS. That's all that they do.
Yeah, you look it up online and anybody can do that. It's pretty innocuous. But I was curious to see that there's a South African there in a fairly prominent position.
Rodney Jaffe.
Yeah. So Rodney Jaffe is an interesting name, people, for you to pay attention to because it keeps popping up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Michael.
Top cybersecurity expert under the Obama administration.
Yeah, top cyber expert under the Obama administration, and then what?
Huge piece of shit. But
Michael.
He becomes. He was told, right? Hey, you'll be the VIP if Hillary wins. He ends up being a part of the Durham indictment against Michael Sussman. So Michael Sussman's representing him, representing Twitter, representing Neustar, and partner at Perkins Coie, all at the same time. And so these files are very important for people to get attention and draw attention to, because those are your FISA Gate files. And so I know we're kind of jumping, but I know you don't have too much time. But this system, right, is how you process all of your FISA warrants. It's how you pull them all. It's how you, if you need to order the warrant, right, it goes through your portability system, and it goes through LEAP, which is
why
does it do?
Why does a FISA warrant go through a portability? Don't you print it out and go to the court, or do you email it? Is that what it is?
Well, I think there was one FISA warrant that was ever denied. 11 maybe total that were denied for whatever reasons, but that's out of 30, 40 plus thousand, or even probably crazier number than that. Because every warrant that gets accepted, you're thinking, oh, that's just for one person. No, it's not. when you go to open a line, you're opening a line of like hundreds of thousands of people's data. So, yeah, it's there was no oversight. Basically, there never was.
But Michael, you didn't answer the question. I'm still trying to understand. What does a FISA warrant have to do with a portability center?
Well, so that's where they would need to go to request to get to pull the data, right?
I see. So that's what you're talking about. So we were missing a step there, because you're talking about when you get a FISA warrant, basically you're going to the intelligence, the highest intelligence court in the land that was set up specifically to approve warrantless surveillance,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And that surveillance isn't just on one person. When you're surveilling, what you're saying is for each line of surveillance can cover thousands, hundreds of thousands of people?
Incidental surveillance is what it's called.
What is it called?
Incidental surveillance?
Because as you're collecting from your target, you're incidentally collecting
From everybody.
information and data from everybody around them, and that can number in the hundreds of thousands,
Easily, yeah.
right?
Very easily, yep.
To
That
Iran,
speech,
to
Hillary's
Belarus,
State
and to
Department
other
came out
oppressive
with a
governments,
statement
about which the
said,
State Department
we are not going
was
to broaden
concerned.
sanctions on Iran. Ericsson risked being put on a list by the federal government in the United States and enemy states. There was actually an effort being put forward in Washington to broaden.
Continue to give speeches?
Oh, yeah. I got to pay our bills.